It happened in an instant. That strange flicker of intuition before the mind could explain it. A chill, a pulse, a warning that something unseen was already moving toward you. You paused, but logic dismissed it. Minutes later, events unfolded exactly as that silent voice had hinted. That moment, brief, electric, undeniable, made you question everything you thought you knew about perception. What if what we call reality is only the visible layer of a far larger field? And what if your mind, even now, is already touching what lies beyond sight, shaping it, responding to it, without you realizing it? You've been told since you were a child that seeing is believing. The eyes, we're taught, are the ultimate authority, the gatekeepers of what's real. If you can't see it, it probably doesn't exist. That idea feels safe. It gives you the comfort of edges, the reassurance that reality is measurable and complete. But somewhere deep down, a quiet part of you suspects that what you see might only be the surface, a projection filtered through layers of assumption, habit, and memory. Imagine standing in a dark theater, the movie flickering before you. The light hits the screen. Characters move. Emotions rise. You get lost in the story, forget the projector behind you, and the fact that it's your own mind deciding where to focus. That's the paradox of perception. You think you're watching the world, when in truth, you're watching a world your brain is building in real time. Every second, your eyes deliver millions of bits of information to your brain, but your conscious mind can only handle a tiny fraction of that flood. The rest, color, shape, motion, sound, gets filtered out. What remains is not an objective picture of the world, but a stitched-together simulation. You don't see reality, you see your version of it. A personalized rendering, shaped by what you've been trained to notice. Take a moment right now. Notice the feeling of your clothes against your skin, the faint sound you hadn't registered until I mentioned it, the subtle weight of your body on the chair. None of these sensations appeared just now. They've been here all along. You simply weren't aware of them, because your mind decided they weren't relevant. What else then might you be missing? Not because it's absent, but because it's invisible to your habitual attention. That's the first crack in the illusion. The recognition that the visible world isn't all there is, but rather what your mind allows you to perceive. This permission is shaped by expectation. When you expect to see certain things, your brain literally alters your sensory processing to match that pattern. It's called top-down prediction. Your mind fills in blanks, edits reality, and constructs continuity where there might be none. Consider this. Two people can stand in the same room, witness the same event, and later describe completely different realities. One notices the tension in someone's posture, the other swears there was none. One feels the atmosphere charged, the other calls it ordinary. Who is right? Both are men within the limits of their own perceptual filters. The world you see isn't shared, it's translated. Think about driving a familiar route. Your mind drifts. You arrive at your destination without recalling half the trip. You saw enough to stay safe, but not enough to be awake. That's what daily perception often becomes, mechanical seeing, not conscious observation. The eyes are open, but awareness is asleep. This illusion has a cost. When you assume that what's visible is all that exists, you stop questioning the unseen forces shaping your choices. You take coincidence for randomness, intuition for imagination, emotion for noise. The unmeasured parts of life, timing, resonance, presence, are dismissed as unscientific, even though they quietly sculpt every moment you live. But here's the subtle irony. Science itself has begun to hint at this incompleteness. Neuroscientists talk about predictive coding, where perception is less about recording the world and more about guessing it, with the brain constantly correcting its own predictions. The world you think you see is a negotiation between incoming data and internal expectation. What you perceive is not out there, but an agreement between you and your own neural model of reality. If you've ever been surprised by something that seemed obvious in hindsight, a friend's hidden sadness, an opportunity you overlooked, you've experienced the edges of this illusion. The signs were there, but invisible to your conditioned attention. Only after the event do you realize your mind had been editing the truth for the sake of efficiency. That efficiency keeps you functional, but it also keeps you blind. The question then isn't whether the invisible exists, but whether you've built a habit of seeing only what confirms your story of the world. Each belief, each label, acts like tinted glass over the lens of your perception. You stop perceiving directly and start recognizing instead, recycling old interpretations instead of meeting the present moment freshly. So what happens if you begin to question the reliability of what you see? Not with paranoia, but with curiosity. What if, instead of assuming that vision equals truth, you start treating your senses as hypotheses, temporary readings of a far larger field of possibility? This simple shift transforms observation into an active practice rather than a passive recording. Pause for a second. Look around you now. Let your gaze soften. Instead of identifying objects, notice the spaces between them, the air, the subtle light, the quiet hum of existence that isn't captured by language. Stay there, just noticing. Something in you relaxes. The mind momentarily stops naming. In that silence, the boundary between you and the world begins to blur. That space, that unmeasured luminous gap, is where the next truth waits. Because if the visible world is an edited story, then the mind's filters are the editors. The question is, who's doing the editing and why? It's there in that hidden architecture of perception that we begin to uncover a deeper mystery, one that neuroscience is just beginning to touch, the hidden frequency of the mind, the place where the seen and unseen exchange their signals. And that's where we turn next. There's a quiet pulse inside you, not your heartbeat, not your breath, something subtler, harder to name. It's the rhythm of your awareness. Every thought, every perception, every decision rides on it, yet most of the time it runs unnoticed, like background static beneath the noise of your daily life. Science calls it brain activity, but ancient traditions might have called it resonance, the invisible hum that connects your inner world to everything around you. Neuroscience tells us that your brain filters almost all incoming sensory data, about 90 to 95% of it, before you're even aware of it. Imagine that. You're living inside a world of signals, but you're only hearing the faintest whisper of the orchestra. What reaches your conscious mind isn't the full symphony of reality, but the edited track your brain thinks you need to hear to survive. It's efficient, yes, but it's also limiting. Because when you filter reality, you also filter possibility. The brain's filtering isn't random. It follows the tuning of your internal frequency, the patterns of attention, emotion, and expectation that form your unique perceptual signature. Each belief, each emotional habit, acts like a tuning fork. It resonates with certain frequencies of reality and dampens others. That's why two people can walk through the same city street and experience entirely different worlds. One feels danger, the other sees opportunity. One notices tension in every face, the other feels connection everywhere. They're not lying, they're tuned differently. Think about a radio dial. The station you hear depends on the frequency you select. Turn it just slightly and the music changes. The signal was always there, you simply weren't tuned to it. Your mind works the same way. The invisible frequencies around you, intuition, subtle emotion, timing, coincidence, are always transmitting. But your attention decides which one comes through clearly and which remains static. Try this. Close your eyes for a moment and notice the faint hum inside your body. Maybe it's the rhythm of your breath or the vibration in your hands when you become still enough. That vibration isn't mystical, it's physiological. Your nervous system is constantly oscillating between states of alertness and calm, constantly recalibrating to the signals it receives. This rhythm defines your perceptual bandwidth. When you're anxious, your frequency narrows. When you're open and calm, it widens. The wider the band, the more of reality you can register. Researchers studying brain coherence have discovered that when different parts of the brain synchronize their electrical patterns, people report moments of clarity, intuition, or deep insight. In other words, when the internal noise quiets and your mental frequencies align, information seems to flow more freely, as if you suddenly begin to see what was always there. That's not magic, it's coherence. A measurable state where scattered signals begin to harmonize. But here's where it gets interesting. This internal coherence doesn't just happen to you. It responds to your attention. Focus acts like a conductor, gathering scattered thoughts into a single rhythm. When your attention is divided, your inner frequencies scatter too. You feel drained, distracted, vaguely detached from your own life. But when you bring your awareness into a single point, not through force but through presence, something shifts. The internal noise fades and a signal emerges from the static. You've felt this before, maybe during a walk in nature or in the quiet after a difficult conversation, when your mind suddenly feels wider, more transparent. You sense patterns behind events, connections between moments that shouldn't logically fit, but somehow do. That's the hidden frequency surfacing, your awareness temporarily aligning with the larger field of information around you. From a neurological standpoint, this could be explained as the brain entering a state of alpha or theta rhythm. Slower, more coherent waves associated with creativity and insight. From a more experiential view, it feels like seeing from the inside out instead of the outside in. Your perception no longer stops at surfaces. It begins to feel through them. You start perceiving not just what is, but what is becoming. Here's where observation gains power. The mind doesn't passively receive reality, it resonates with it. The clearer your inner frequency, the more precise your perception, and the more your environment seems to respond in kind. Have you ever noticed how when you're calm, solutions seem to appear naturally? But when you're frantic, everything feels resistant. That's not coincidence, it's resonance. Your state of consciousness modulates the kind of information you can perceive, and in turn, the kind of reality you can participate in. Yet most people live unaware of their own frequency, assuming that what they perceive is fixed and objective. They treat reality like a photograph instead of a waveform, but the brain doesn't operate like a camera. It operates like an instrument. It's constantly tuning, amplifying, cancelling, and harmonizing signals. When you don't consciously tune it, the environment, media, stress, memory, twice does it for you. You become reactive, echoing frequencies that aren't even yours. This is why inner silence isn't an escape. It's a calibration. When you become still, you begin to hear your original tone again, beneath the static of conditioning. You realize that attention isn't merely about focus, it's about frequency alignment. What you call intuition is often just your system picking up information outside the narrow band of the visible. Now, imagine what happens when you start observing this process in real time, noticing how your state alters what you perceive, how your mood changes what you notice. That's when perception turns into participation. You stop being a passive receiver of data and begin to recognize yourself as a transmitter, shaping reality not through effort, but through the coherence of your awareness. And this brings us to a subtle but vital risk, one most people overlook. Because if attention carries this much power, what happens when we look at the world unconsciously? When we allow fear, bias, or habit to dictate what we notice and what we ignore? That silent risk is waiting just beneath the surface, the danger of passive seeing. It's easy to believe that simply looking is the same as truly seeing. The eyes are open, the world floods in, and we assume perception is automatic, a passive stream of information flowing toward an objective observer. But observation isn't passive. Every glance you cast shapes what you register, and what you register shapes what you believe is real. The greatest danger isn't blindness, it's unconscious seeing, the kind that convinces you you've already understood everything there is to see. Passive seeing happens quietly, without fanfare. It begins the moment perception stops being an act of curiosity and becomes an act of confirmation. You stop meeting reality as it is, and instead start using it to prove what you already think. It's subtle, a mental reflex that filters every new moment through the lens of old conclusions. You see what fits your story and dismiss the rest. The eyes remain open, but awareness contracts. Picture walking through a familiar street. You've passed it 1,000 times, so your brain compresses the details into a shorthand version of the world. The same buildings, the same signs, the same rhythm of traffic. You think you know this street, so you stop really looking. Yet if you paused and observed with new attention, you'd notice that nothing there is the same. The light falling differently, the subtle change in a stranger's face, the air carrying a different weight. The street is alive, changing each second, but your mind sees only its archived version. That's the quiet cost of passive seeing. It locks you inside yesterday's perception. You become a curator of your own past, rather than a participant in the living present. And when perception hardens, so does possibility. Decisions, relationships, even creativity start orbiting the same narrow circle. You begin to think you've hit the limits of the world, when in truth you've just stopped updating your vision. Neuroscientists studying attention have observed that the brain builds internal predictive maps of reality. These maps allow you to function efficiently. You don't have to analyze every stimulus from scratch, but efficiency comes at a price. The brain's predictive machinery is lazy. It prefers the comfort of known patterns over the friction of surprise. That's why new information, especially when it contradicts your beliefs, often feels uncomfortable or even threatening. The mind defends its model more fiercely than it defends the truth. Passive seeing is what happens when this protective reflex goes unnoticed. You don't question your interpretations anymore. You believe your perception is the world rather than a rendering of it. From that moment, every interaction becomes a mirror of your bias. You stop perceiving to learn and start perceiving to reinforce. It's like walking through life with a pair of tinted lenses and forgetting you're wearing them. You can test this right now. Think of someone you know well, maybe a colleague, a friend, a partner. Recall the image you have of them, their habits, their tone, the way you expect them to act. Now imagine you've never met this person before. See them as if for the first time, without the archive of assumptions. You'll notice something shifts. Perhaps their voice sounds warmer, or their expressions more complex. That's what happens when passive seeing gives way to conscious observation. Reality deepens. The risk of remaining passive isn't just perceptual, it's emotional. When you believe you already see clearly, empathy narrows. You stop being curious about others' inner worlds, assuming you already understand them. Relationships lose their sense of discovery. Conflict hardens into judgment. The invisible subtleties that connect human beings, tone, timing, silence, go unnoticed, replaced by automatic reactions. And yet, in this very danger lies a hidden key. Because noticing your own passivity is already an act of awakening. The moment you catch yourself assuming, labeling, or rehearsing old perceptions, a small space opens inside. That space is the threshold of true observation, the kind that doesn't just record reality, but reshapes it. From a scientific angle, awareness itself interrupts automatic perception. When you bring mindful attention to what you're seeing, the brain's default prediction mode slows down. Neural imaging shows increased activation in regions responsible for novelty and empathy. In simpler terms, paying attention rewires your filters. You literally start seeing more. But awareness isn't achieved through effort or control. It's not about forcing yourself to see better. It begins in stillness, the willingness to meet what's in front of you without rushing to interpret it. When the mind quiets, the senses recalibrate. What was previously invisible, subtle energy, micro-expressions, emotional cues, starts to emerge. Think of a pond after a storm. The surface is cloudy, full of ripples, reflecting nothing. Then, as the wind dies down, the water becomes transparent. The pond didn't gain clarity, it simply stopped being disturbed. Your awareness works the same way. Passive seeing is the storm, the constant movement of thought, opinion, and projection. Conscious seeing is the still pond, clear enough to reflect what's real. Yet most of us are addicted to movement. We scroll, analyze, react. We crave stimulation, mistaking motion for life. But this constant motion dulls perception. The more you rush to interpret, the less you actually observe. You begin to live in a state of cognitive echo, responding to your own interpretations rather than to reality itself. This is why moments of genuine observation often feel so rare. They require a suspension of the need to know, to look without labeling, to listen without preparing a response, to allow experience to unfold without conclusion. It's not passivity, it's presence. And in that presence, something remarkable happens. The world seems to notice you back. Events line up, timing feels precise, intuition sharpens. You begin to sense a reciprocity between your seeing and what is seen. That realization, that observation itself changes what's observed, is more than poetic, it's scientific. In the next step, we explore how this principle, long known in quantum physics, may extend beyond the laboratory into the fabric of your daily reality. Because if seeing is never neutral, then every moment of observation might be shaping the world you think you merely witness. It began as a puzzle in physics, a strange discovery buried in the subatomic world. Scientists observed that the tiniest particles behaved differently when they were being watched. In the famous double-slit experiment, light and electrons moved like waves when unobserved, spreading in patterns of probability. But the moment they were measured, the instant observation entered the equation, the wave collapsed into a single outcome. The act of looking changed what was being seen. That shouldn't make sense. In the classical view of science, the observer is separate, objective, uninvolved. Reality is supposed to exist independently, indifferent to who watches it. Yet, quantum experiments refuse to obey that logic. The results seem to whisper an uncomfortable truth. There is no clean line between the observer and the observed. Consciousness, or at least the act of measurement, appears to participate in the unfolding of events. Physicists, being cautious, debated endlessly about what this meant. Some said the measurement device, not the human mind, caused the collapse. Others proposed that all possible outcomes exist until observation selects one. But beneath the technical arguments, a deeper question pulsed quietly. Does consciousness itself shape reality? You don't need a lab to sense that possibility. You've experienced it in ordinary life. Moments when your focused attention seemed to alter the outcome of a situation, when you entered a room in tension and felt the atmosphere change the instant you noticed it, when you looked at someone with genuine empathy and their posture softened without a word. The observer effect may be most visible in quantum physics, but its echoes reach far beyond. Observation is not neutral. Whether in an experiment or in daily life, attention carries energy, direction, and intention. It organizes what's possible. In a sense, every observation is a tiny act of creation, a choice among infinite potential realities. The world isn't static, it's responsive, waiting for your focus to give it form. From a neurological point of view, your brain works like a prediction engine. It constantly forecasts what will happen next, and your attention updates that prediction in real time. The moment you observe something closely, your brain reconfigures neural circuits, strengthening the pattern you've chosen to notice. Attention literally sculpts perception. Over time, what you repeatedly observe becomes more dominant in your reality. You see more of what you look for and less of what you ignore. But there's a subtler layer. Observation doesn't just record reality, it influences it through behavior. Imagine a teacher who expects excellence from a student. That expectation, an invisible observation, changes the teacher's tone, posture, and micro-expressions. The student responding unconsciously begins to perform differently. The observer effect at work, not in particles, but in people. This is known in psychology as the expectancy effect, and it mirrors quantum behavior on a human scale. What you anticipate, you help bring forth. Think of attention as a field. Wherever it lands, things grow more defined. When you focus on fear, you begin to detect more reasons to be afraid. When you focus on opportunity, your perception filters toward paths of possibility. The external world hasn't changed. Your observation has rearranged its probabilities. Reality follows your gaze. This is not mystical thinking, it's behavioral physics. Even in the brain, neurons fire more readily in pathways you attend to. Focus is fertilizer for neural growth. What you observe with consistency becomes easier to perceive, easier to attract, easier to live. Observation is not passive awareness, it's active participation in the patterning of your life. The danger, of course, lies in unconscious observation. When you look at the world through resentment or self-doubt, your perception aligns with those frequencies. You begin to collapse possibilities into smaller versions of what you fear. The universe mirrors your internal lens with ruthless precision, not as punishment but as feedback. The field reflects the observer. You can test this easily. The next time you enter a social space, bring awareness to your own state before speaking. Notice how your tone shifts the dynamic. When you listen with genuine curiosity, people become more open. When you listen with judgment, they contract. Nothing material changes except the quality of your observation, yet the atmosphere reorganizes around it. That's not superstition. That's physics applied to consciousness. The observer effect suggests that reality isn't a stage where fixed objects move according to deterministic laws. It's more like a conversation, a continuous exchange between the perceiver and the perceived. You don't merely watch life unfold, you engage in a subtle dialogue with it. Your attention is the language through which reality responds. There's a phrase in quantum theory, participatory universe. It describes a cosmos where existence becomes real only through interaction. Nothing simply is until it's noticed, measured, related to. The same could be said of your personal world. Opportunities don't exist in your experience until you notice them. Emotions don't integrate until you allow them to be seen. Even your own potential remains theoretical until you turn your awareness toward it. And yet, awareness is a double-edged instrument. The more conscious your observation, the more you influence what unfolds. But the more rigid your observation, the more you demand a specific outcome, the less flexible the field becomes. Observation, to be creative, must remain open. The quantum field responds not to control, but to coherence. So the question isn't whether observation changes reality. It's how you are observing, from fear or from clarity, from habit or from presence. Every moment you look, you cast a vote for the version of the world that will emerge next. Most people never realize they are voting at all. If you begin to see observation as participation, you might start treating your attention as something sacred, a force that shapes the invisible architecture of your day. You'll notice that when you observe consciously, outcomes tend to align with coherence, with flow, and when you observe unconsciously, they fracture, becoming chaotic. This understanding leads us to an even more radical possibility. If observation shapes reality, then the observer, your mind, might also be a creative engine in itself. Perhaps the act of seeing isn't just altering the world, perhaps it's generating it. And if that's true, then attention isn't merely power, it's authorship. That's where the next step of this exploration begins. Understanding how the mind itself, through the patterns of focus and interpretation, becomes the painter of reality, the hidden artist behind the scenes, shaping existence stroke by stroke. You've heard the phrase, perception shapes reality. It sounds poetic, almost motivational, until you realize it's not metaphor, it's mechanics. Every moment, your mind is translating energy into experience, converting raw sensory data into meaning. But meaning isn't discovered, it's generated. In other words, the world you think you live in is a co-production between the external and the internal, a mirror of your mental architecture. Modern neuroscience quietly supports this. The brain doesn't passively record the world, it predicts it. It builds models based on memory, emotion, and expectation, then tests them against incoming information. What you perceive as reality is actually a constantly updated hypothesis, one so seamless you mistake it for truth. You're not seeing the world as it is, you're seeing the world as your mind believes it should be. Consider the simple act of walking through a forest. Two people walk the same path. One notices danger, the rustle of a snake, the uneven ground, the shadows. The other notices harmony, sunlight through the leaves, the scent of soil, the rhythm of life. Same environment, two different worlds. Each mind projects its own emotional template onto the scene and calls it real. The outer world becomes the screen, the mind, the projector. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's your everyday reality. Every decision, every reaction, every feeling arises from the way your mind paints the moment. Your nervous system is a feedback loop between perception and interpretation. When you believe something is threatening, your body releases stress hormones, sharpening your senses toward danger. You literally begin to see more of what supports your belief. Likewise, when you feel safe, your brain expands its perceptual bandwidth. Colors brighten, details multiply, time slows. Your internal state alters your sensory range. In a lab, this is called state-dependent perception. But outside the lab, it's called life. The reality you inhabit bends to the tone of your mind. You can confirm this in small, ordinary ways. Think of a day when you woke up in frustration. Maybe you spilled coffee, hit traffic, and felt the world resisting you. Then something shifted. You laughed, breathed, or let go. Suddenly, the same day seemed easier. The external events hadn't changed, but the world's texture had. What shifted wasn't circumstance. It was your consciousness. That's the quiet truth behind the idea that the mind creates reality. It doesn't mean you can simply imagine a mountain of gold into existence. It means your focus, your inner coherence, and your emotional frequency determine how reality responds to you. In quantum terms, you collapse potential into form. In psychological terms, you select from infinite interpretations of a single event. In practical terms, your attention is an instrument that tunes experience. Think of an artist standing before a blank canvas. The pigments on the palette are neutral. They could become anything. The brush doesn't decide what to paint. The artist's state does. If the artist is restless, the strokes are sharp and tense. If the artist is centered, the lines flow. The canvas doesn't resist or assist, it reflects. Life works the same way. Every moment is a canvas, and your perception is the brush. What you call the world is the cumulative record of what you've been painting unconsciously. Psychology calls this the self-fulfilling prophecy. When you expect failure, you act hesitantly, communicate uncertainty, and invite confirmation. When you expect receptivity, you act with confidence and attract cooperation. The mind leads, reality follows. But this mechanism operates beneath awareness, which is why it feels like life happens to you. In truth, it's happening through you, and the mind doesn't create reality only through thought. It does so through coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, and actions align around a clear inner signal, the outer world seems to reorganize itself accordingly. Researchers studying psychophysiological coherence at institutions like the HeartMath Institute have shown that when emotional rhythms stabilize, especially through gratitude, calm, or focused attention, brain and heart activity synchronize. In these moments, perception sharpens, reaction time improves, and decision-making becomes more fluid. The body, the mind, and the environment fall into resonance. In practical terms, coherence feels like this. Things flow. The right call arrives, the conversation opens, the timing clicks. You don't feel like you're pushing reality. You feel like you're participating in its rhythm. The mind isn't forcing, it's aligning. This alignment is what ancient traditions described as harmony with the Tao or attunement with divine order. Modern language might call it neural synchrony. Whatever the name, the principle is the same. Coherence amplifies creation. But there's a hidden trap. The mind that creates can also destroy when it creates unconsciously. Most people live in loops of mental projection, repeating stories that no longer serve them. I'm unlucky. People can't be trusted. There's never enough. Each repetition strengthens a neural circuit, which in turn filters perception to confirm the belief. The mind keeps painting the same pattern and wonders why the world never changes. To break the loop, awareness must intervene, not by forcing positive thoughts, but by observing the mechanism itself. The moment you catch the mind in the act of creating from fear, the spell breaks. Observation resets the brush. You return to the blank canvas. That's where creation regains its purity, not in control, but in presence. You can feel this shift in your body. When you're caught in reactive creation, your chest tightens, breath shortens, and time speeds up. When awareness returns, the body softens, perception widens, and life feels slower, denser, more textured. That physiological change is your proof that consciousness and reality are intertwined. The body is not separate from the act of creation. It's the tuning instrument through which your perception stabilizes form. So when we speak of creating reality, we're speaking about participating in a field that mirrors your state. The question isn't whether you're creating, you always are. The question is, from what level of mind are you doing it? From survival or from awareness? From repetition or from discovery? Once you recognize this dynamic, a new curiosity awakens. If your attention can shape the visible world, what happens when you look beyond it? When you observe not only external phenomena but the mind itself as part of a larger network of observers? Could it be that your consciousness doesn't end at your skull, but extends into the very fabric of what's being observed? That's where the next layer begins, the realization that the observer is not separate from what's seen. That while you create reality through perception, reality might simultaneously be shaping you. There's a quiet misunderstanding that shapes most of human life. It's so deeply woven into the way we think that we rarely question it. It goes like this: first believe, then see. We're told to have faith in what's proven, to wait for evidence before trusting what we sense. But that formula reverses the true order of perception. The reality is the opposite. First you observe, then you understand. Seeing beyond the visible requires letting go of the need to know before you look. The mind is addicted to certainty. It craves the comfort of conclusions. From childhood, we're rewarded for being right, not for being curious. So, the moment we face something unfamiliar, the mind rushes to categorize it. It doesn't really see, it labels. It doesn't explore, it defines. This reflex gives us a sense of control, but it also blinds us. Because once you name something too quickly, you stop perceiving what it truly is. You trade discovery for repetition. Think of the last time you met someone new. Within seconds, your mind formed a sketch. Their tone, posture, choice of words. You decided, often unconsciously, whether they were trustworthy, intelligent, worth your attention. Those judgments felt instantaneous, even accurate. But what if, in that moment, you weren't meeting the person at all? You were meeting the sum of your own expectations. That's the first layer of blindness, mistaking your projections for perception. The mistake that keeps you from seeing beyond is this compulsion to interpret before you observe, to demand proof before presence. When you live by that habit, the invisible world, intuition, subtle connection, timing, synchronicity, remains hidden. Not because it isn't there, but because your attention is too busy measuring what it can already explain. In science, this mistake appears as observer bias, the tendency to perceive data through the lens of what you expect to find. In life, it appears as emotional bias, the tendency to perceive events through the lens of what you fear or desire. In both cases, the same law applies. Expectation shapes perception. You can't see beyond the visible if your mind insists on predicting what it's about to see. Observation, in its purest form, requires suspension, a temporary pause of interpretation. The physicist Niels Bohr once said, "Every sentence I utter must be understood not as an affirmation but as a question." That is the posture of the beyond observer, not to declare, but to inquire. The mind that sees beyond doesn't chase evidence, it notices emergence. It doesn't look for what's true according to memory, it looks for what's real in this moment. Try this. Look at an ordinary object near you, a glass of water, a pen, your own hand. Don't name it, don't analyze its function. Just watch it as if you've never seen it before. Notice how the surface reflects light, how the air shifts around it, how space defines its edges. Something subtle happens. The familiar begins to feel strange again, alive, not conceptual. That freshness is the beginning of true vision. The invisible reveals itself only to the unhurried gaze. This practice sounds simple, but it challenges one of the mind's deepest fears, the fear of not knowing. The intellect believes its safety depends on control, and control depends on labels. But the unseen world doesn't obey labels. It moves through silence, subtlety, ambiguity. The moment you allow not knowing, you create room for that world to enter your awareness. It's as if the universe waits for the observer to stop defining before it starts revealing. Every tradition that studies consciousness, from contemplative mysticism to modern neuroscience, points to the same paradox. The more you try to grasp reality, the more it eludes you. But when you relax your grip, reality begins to show itself in ways logic alone can't predict. That's not irrationality, it's higher sensitivity. The mind expands its field of perception when it no longer tries to defend its conclusions. Think of it like tuning a radio. If you fix the dial on one frequency, you'll hear only one channel. Belief is that fixed dial. Observation without belief, open awareness, lets you scan the full spectrum. Most of the invisible signals of life are faint. They require a mind quiet enough to notice them. Intuition, for example, doesn't shout. It hums softly beneath thought. But if the mind is busy demanding evidence, that hum gets drowned out. The real mistake isn't skepticism, it's premature certainty. Skepticism questions, and questions keep perception alive. But certainty freezes it. The mind that claims to already know stops learning. It sees repetition where there's constant transformation, and that's why the invisible remains invisible, not because it hides, but because we're unwilling to stay in the tension of mystery. Awakening deeper perception, then, is not about adding new beliefs or exotic techniques. It's about subtraction, removing the noise of assumption until what's left is pure awareness. Observation becomes a living dialogue instead of a transaction. You stop demanding proof and start participating in revelation. You can sense this shift in small, tangible ways. When you enter a room with openness rather than expectation, people feel it. When you listen without preparing your response, you start hearing what was never said aloud. When you walk outside and notice light, not just objects, the world feels less like scenery and more like presence. Seeing beyond begins here, in the quality of your attention, not the quantity of information you hold. But there's a deeper twist waiting beyond this practice. Because once you start observing without the filters of belief, something unexpected happens. You realize that the act of observation itself is being observed. That consciousness isn't a single spotlight aimed at the world, but a network of mirrors reflecting endlessly between the seen and the seer. The next threshold unfolds there, where perception reverses direction, and you begin to sense that the observer is not merely shaping reality, but is also being shaped by it in return. There's a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when you realize that your gaze isn't one way. You've spent a lifetime looking out, analyzing, measuring, interpreting. You thought you were the watcher behind the glass, the one holding the lens. But suddenly, something inverts. The sense of separation begins to flicker. It's as if the world is quietly looking back. You can feel it, not as paranoia or fantasy, but as presence. A silent awareness behind the scenery, responding to your attention with its own. This is the twist that unravels everything you thought you knew about consciousness. The observer is also being observed. You are not outside reality, you are a node within it, part of an infinite network of mutual perception. Every act of observing changes the field, and every field, in turn, leaves an imprint on you. For centuries, we've imagined consciousness as a private theater inside the skull, the brain projecting a film for an inner spectator. But modern physics, systems theory, and even neuroscience are converging on a different picture. Consciousness may not be a property of the individual mind, but a distributed phenomenon, a web of awareness in which each observer participates. The mind is not merely looking at the universe, it's looking from within it. In quantum terms, this interconnection shows up as entanglement, particles separated by vast distances that still respond to each other instantly, as if sharing a single state. What one experiences, the other reflects. Observation in one place affects outcomes in another. It's as though the universe itself is structured not as a collection of things, but as relationships, an unbroken field of exchange. Now translate that to your own experience. When you observe someone, a stranger across a cafe, a child sleeping, a tree bending in the wind, you assume you're the one doing the looking. Yet, if you stay with that perception long enough, something mysterious occurs. The boundaries blur. You feel watched back, not by a pair of eyes, but by the very fabric of being. It's as if perception is circular, folding in on itself. The seer and the seen become two halves of one motion. This isn't mystical language, it's phenomenological truth. Consciousness doesn't arise in isolation. Every observation is an exchange of information. The photons bouncing off the object enter your retina, become electrical signals, and transform into an image inside your mind. But those same photons have already interacted with what they illuminated. The act of seeing binds you physically and energetically to what you see. You don't just observe light, you share it. In daily life, this reciprocity plays out in subtler ways. Think of how rooms hold emotional residue. You walk into a space after a heated argument, and you can feel the tension even if no one speaks, or how a person's calm presence seems to slow your own heart rate, even without words. These are not coincidences. They're traces of mutual observation, consciousness fields intertwining, adjusting to each other, like tuning forks resonating to a shared tone. If the observer is also observed, then your inner state is never purely private. Your thoughts, moods, and attention radiate into the collective field, influencing it just as you are influenced by it. You are both a receiver and a transmitter of perception. That's why moments of true awareness often carry a sense of humility. You realize that consciousness isn't something you own. It's something that flows through you. You're not the source of the light. You're a temporary window through which it passes. There's a scientific echo of this in the emerging study of social synchronization. When two or more people interact with genuine attention, their brain waves, heart rhythms, and even micro-movements begin to align. Their bodies literally start to mirror each other's internal states. It's as though the act of mutual observation weaves them into a single system, a living circuit of awareness. Consciousness in this sense is less like a spotlight and more like a field of resonance, one that grows stronger the more it's shared. But this realization carries a responsibility. If you are constantly being observed by the field you inhabit, then every thought, every emotion, every silent act of attention contributes to the texture of that field. The universe is, in a way, taking notes through you. What you radiate returns amplified. What you deny reverberates in unseen ways. To be conscious of being observed is to become accountable to your own vibration, and yet there's beauty in this reciprocity. Once you understand that the world is responsive, not just mechanically but perceptually, you begin to approach it differently. You stop treating it as an object and start relating to it as a participant. A tree becomes a companion, not scenery. A stranger's eyes feel like mirrors, not surfaces. Even silence begins to sound inhabited, alive with awareness. You begin to sense that life itself is conscious, and that you are one of its ways of noticing itself. You can glimpse this right now in the simplest act. Take a breath and feel the air enter you. The air isn't just in you. It was already part of you, circulating through the same atmosphere that others breathe. When you exhale, the world inhales. Observation works the same way. You take in the world, and the world takes in you. It's a continuous exchange, a rhythm older than thought. This is the hidden heart of the observer effect. Not merely that observation changes reality, but that reality, in observing you back, transforms the observer. Each act of awareness refines the instrument through which it flows. You become more transparent, more receptive, more finely tuned to coherence. It's a feedback loop of awakening. And here, at this threshold, a new dimension of perception begins to unfold. Because once you realize that the observer is also observed, the old desire to control reality fades. You start to sense that the true power lies not in manipulating outcomes, but in entering resonance with them, perceiving without resistance, allowing the field of consciousness to harmonize through you. That's where the next step naturally leads, the awakening of what could be called the beyond observer, the mind that no longer sees from separation, but from participation, where the invisible and the visible finally move as one. At first, awareness feels like ownership. You think, I am observing this. I am the one who sees. There's a sense of agency in it, even pride. the satisfaction of knowing you can step back and watch your mind, your emotions, your choices. But deeper awareness reveals something unexpected. The more you truly observe, the less you there is doing the observing. The center you once identified with begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, panoramic presence. What remains is not a watcher behind the eyes, but awareness itself, vast, unlocalized, intimate with everything it perceives. This is the beginning of what can be called the awakening of the beyond observer. It isn't an event or an achievement. It's a gradual unmasking, the discovery that consciousness doesn't need to hold or control what it sees. It simply is seeing. The mind relaxes its grip, the body softens, and perception expands until the boundary between the observer and the observed vanishes like mist. You realize that you were never standing outside the world looking in. You were always inside it, and it inside you. There's a striking moment in this shift when perception stops feeling effortful. You no longer look at things, you look as awareness itself. The world seems to breathe with you as though your seeing and its being are synchronized. Light feels more vivid, not because your eyes are sharper, but because nothing stands between perception and presence anymore. It's not mystical, it's ordinary life, seen without filters. The mind has spent years trying to define, categorize, and manage what it perceives, but the beyond observer doesn't define, it receives. It doesn't analyze, it resonates. Its power comes from coherence, not control. When awareness rests in that state, reality feels lighter, more fluid, more cooperative. Decisions arise naturally, without the grinding of analysis. Action happens with precision, as if guided by a subtler intelligence. The effort that used to drive you, the constant pushing toward outcomes, begins to feel unnecessary, even obsolete. Neuroscience gives us a small window into this phenomenon. When meditators enter deep states of awareness, the brain's default mode network, the circuitry that generates a sense of self, quiets down. In that silence, regions responsible for empathy, intuition, and sensory integration light up. The brain shifts from self-referential chatter to unified perception. The body follows, heart rhythm stabilizes, stress hormones drop, and attention widens. What's happening physiologically mirrors what's happening existentially. The system moves from fragmentation to coherence. But the beyond observer isn't a trance or an escape from life. It's the opposite. You become more intimate with reality, not less. You feel the world's pulse through the smallest details, the flicker of light on a wall, the texture of a voice, the cadence of silence between words. Time slows, not because the clock has changed, but because awareness is no longer split between past and future. Every moment feels self-contained, whole. There's an old Zen image that captures this transition. Before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During awakening, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. After awakening, mountains are again mountains, rivers again rivers. But now you see that they were never separate from you. The beyond observer lives in that third stage. It sees the ordinariness of the world as sacred, precisely because there's no distance left between the sacred and the ordinary. This state doesn't make you passive. On the contrary, it gives action a new texture. Clean, deliberate, free of inner noise. When you move from the beyond observer, there's no internal argument about right or wrong, success or failure. You act because the action aligns with what is. There's no residue, no resistance. It feels like moving in rhythm with the current rather than swimming against it. You might notice how your relationships begin to shift here. Conversations slow down. You listen differently. You no longer wait for your turn to speak. You hear not just the words, but the field behind them. The pauses, the hesitations, the silent calls for connection. People feel seen in a way they rarely are, because the seeing no longer comes from a judging mind, but from presence itself. The beyond observer doesn't observe people as objects of attention. It experiences them as extensions of the same awareness. That subtle recognition changes everything. Even conflict takes on a new meaning. When tension arises, you no longer rush to fix or win. You notice the frequency of reactivity in yourself, the tightening, the surge of heat. And by observing without resisting, you let it dissolve. Observation itself becomes transmutation. The energy that once became anger now becomes clarity. The same force freed from defense becomes understanding. This is what it means to see beyond the visible, to perceive the movement of consciousness behind behavior. And yet, the beyond observer isn't an endpoint. It's an aperture, a widening into something even more participatory. As awareness stabilizes in this non-dual seeing, a deeper intelligence begins to operate through you. You start noticing that synchronicities multiply, creativity flows without strain, and timing feels uncannily precise. It's as if the universe itself is guiding your attention toward coherence. The more you observe without resistance, the more the field responds, adjusting, aligning, orchestrating. At this level, miracle becomes a practical word, not because impossible things happen, but because ordinary things begin to reveal their impossibly perfect coordination. You watch a conversation unfold, a door open, a chance encounter shift a life's direction, and you sense that none of it is random. Observation has become participation. Life is perceiving itself through you. But awakening carries a subtle challenge too. Once you've tasted this unity, the temptation is to cling to it, to turn it into another identity. I am the awakened one. The moment that thought solidifies, the field contracts again. The beyond observer cannot be possessed. It can only be lived. It's not a state to maintain, but a rhythm to trust. The awareness that sees beyond the visible doesn't exclude the human. It includes it tenderly. It allows imperfection, emotion, uncertainty, all as part of the same living awareness. So as this deeper observer wakes, something else dawns beside it. A realization that seeing beyond isn't about escaping the visible world, but redeeming it, revealing its depth from within. The invisible becomes tangible, the tangible becomes luminous, and life feels like one continuous act of perception. And in that widening stillness, a new question begins to form. Not about what you can see, but about what you will choose to see. Because at the heart of this awakening lies a decision to keep perceiving reality through old reflexes of separation, or to step fully into the creative field of consciousness that waits beyond the visible, where seeing and being are the same act. In the end, the world doesn't need to be changed. It needs to be seen. The awakened mind no longer asks reality to prove itself. It participates in its unfolding. The visible and invisible merge into one continuous field of perception, where awareness itself becomes creation. Seeing beyond is not about escaping life, but meeting it so completely that separation dissolves. If you've reached this point, write the word aware in the comments, so I'll know you walked the full path with me. And if this journey spoke to something in you, watch one of the videos now appearing on your screen. Each one dives deeper into the mystery of perception, consciousness, and the silent intelligence shaping your reality. Keep observing. The universe is watching back.